This is why alchemy exists, the boy said, so that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead, and then lead will have to turn itself into gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. Paulo Coelho. Greetings, mortals. I'm your host Simon. Welcome back to the Library of Gnosis. Before we start, I want to mention that I have gone through and uploaded all my scripts on Patreon. Go check it out, would you kindly? I have been teaching you a lot of esoteric mysteries, like chaos and order and squaring the circle. But what is the point of this? Well, the point is to complete the great work. But what is the great work? The great work, or in Latin, Magnum Opus, is an alchemical term for the process of working with the prima materia to create the Philosopher's Stone. It has been used to describe personal and spiritual transmutation in the Hermetic tradition. Attached to laboratory processes and chemical color changes, used as a model for the individuation process. In my video on chaos and order, I might have said that the alchemical process only has 3 stages, but I was mistaken. It actually has 4. You'll have to forgive me, but I'll make it up to you by going through it correctly this time around. So, as mentioned, the original process has 4 stages. The start of the process begins with Negredo, the blackening or melanosis. In alchemy, Negredo or blackness means putrefaction or decomposition. Many alchemists believed that as a first step in the pathway to the Philosopher's Stone, all alchemical ingredients had to be cleansed and cooked extensively to a uniform black matter. In analytical psychology, the term became a metaphor for the dark night of the soul, when an individual confronts the shadow within. For Carl Jung, quote, "The rediscovery of the principles of alchemy came to be an important part of my work as a pioneer of psychology." End quote. As a student of alchemy, he and his followers compared the black work of the alchemist, the Negredo, with the often highly critical involvement experienced by the ego, until it accepts the new equilibrium brought about by the creation of the self. Jungians interpreted Negredo in 2 main psychological senses. The first sense represented a subject's initial state of undifferentiated unawareness. The first Negredo, that of the uno naturalis, is an objective state, visible from the outside only, an unconscious state of non-differentiated between self and object, consciousness and the unconscious. Here, the subject is unaware of the unconscious, i.e. the connection with the instincts. In the second sense, the Negredo, the process of individuation, on the other hand, is a subjectively experienced process brought about by the subject's painful, growing awareness of his shadow aspects. It could be described as a moment of maximum despair. That is a prerequisite to personal development. As an individuation unfolds, so confrontation with the shadow produces at first a dead balance, a standstill that hampers moral decisions and makes convictions ineffective or even impossible. Negredo, tenebrositas, chaos, melancholia, Here is the darkest time, the time of despair, disillusionment, envious attacks. The time when eros and superego are at daggers drawn. And there seems to be no way forward. Negredo, the blackening. One subsequently would come an enatidromia. The Negredo gives away to the albedo. The ever-deepening descent into the unconscious suddenly becomes illumination from above. That leads us into the next step in the alchemical process. Albedo. Albedo, the whitening or leucosis. Albedo is a Latinized term meaning whiteness. Following the chaos or massa confusa of the Negredo stage, the alchemist undertakes a purification in albedo, which is literally referred to as ablutio, the washing away of impurities. This phase is concerned with bringing light and clarity to the prima materia. In this process, the subject is divided into two opposing principles, to be later coagulated to form a unity of opposites, or coincidentia oppositorum during Rubedo. Alchemists also applied it to an individual's soul after the first phase is completed, which entailed the decay of matter. In the medieval literature, which developed an intricate system of images and symbols for alchemy, the dove often represented this stage, while the raven symbolized Negredo. Titus Burckhardt interprets the albedo as the end of the lesser work, corresponding to a spiritualization of the body, claiming the goal of this portion of the process is to regain the original purity and receptivity of the soul. Psychologist Carl Jung equated the albedo with the unconscious contrasexual soul images, the anima in men and animus in women. It is a phase where insights into shadow projections are realized, and inflated ego and unneeded conceptualizations are removed from the psyche. Another interpretation describes albedo as an experience of awakening and involves a shift in consciousness where the world becomes more than just an individual's ego, his family, or country. After albedo, we get to the stage I missed last time around. Citrinus, also known as the yellowing or xanthosis. Citrinus, or sometimes xanthosis, is a term given by alchemists to yellowness. It is one of the four major stages of the alchemical Magnum Opus. In alchemical philosophy, Citrinus stood for the dawning of the solar light inherent in one's being, and the reflective lunar or soul light was no longer necessary. Psychologist Carl Jung is credited with interpreting the alchemical process as analogous to modern-day psychoanalysis. In the Jungian archetypical schema, Negredo is the shadow, albedo refers to the anima and animus, contrasexual soul images. Citrinus is the wise old man, or woman archetype. And the final step is Rubedo, which is the self archetype which has achieved wholeness. Rubedo, the reddening, purpling, or iosis. Rubedo is a Latin word meaning redness. Both gold and the philosopher's stone were associated with the color red, as Rubedo signaled alchemical success and the end of the great work. The three alchemical stages preceding Rubedo were Negredo, blackness, which represented purification and spiritual death; albedo, whiteness, which represented purification and Citrinus, yellowness, the solar dawn or awakening. Here is where the confusion on how many stages the alchemical process has, which I had in my previous video. Some sources describe the alchemical process as three-phased, with Citrinus serving as a mere extension and takes place between Albedo and Rubedo. The Rubedo stage entails the attempt of the alchemist to integrate the psycho-spiritual outcomes of the process into a coherent sense of self before its re-entry to the world. The stage can take some time or years to complete due to the required synthesis and substantiation of insights and experiences. In the framework of psychological development, especially with the followers of Jungian psychology, these four alchemical steps are viewed as analogous to the process of attaining individuation, or the process that allows an individual to attain the integration of opposites, their transcendence, and finally emergence out of an undifferentiated unconscious. In an archetypical schema, Rubedo represents the self archetype and is the culmination of the four stages, the merging of ego and self. It is also described as a stage that gives birth to a new personality, represented by the color of blood in alchemy. The stage indicates a process that cannot be reversed, since it involves the struggle of the self towards its manifestation. The self manifests itself in wholeness, a point in which a person discovers their true nature. Another interpretation phrased it as reunification, which entail the reunion of body, soul, and spirit, leading to a diminished inner conflict. We are unraveling our navels so that we may ingest the sun. We are not afraid of the darkness. We trust that the moon shall guide us. We are determining the future at this very moment. We know that the heart is the philosopher's stone. Our music is our alchemy. Saul Williams. In my video of the Seal of Solomon, check it out if you haven't, I mentioned that the red Templar cross represents the blood of Christ, the philosopher's stone, and immortality, the Rubedo. The symbols used in alchemical writing and art to represent this red stage can include blood, a phoenix, a rose, a crowned king, or a figure wearing red clothes. Countless sources mention a reddening process. The 17th dictum of the 12th century, Turba Philosoprum, is one example. Quote, O Turba of philosophers and disciples, now hast thou spoken about making into white, but it yet remains to treat concerning the reddening. Know, all ye seekers after this art, that unless ye whiten, ye cannot make red, because the two natures are nothing other than red and white. Whiten, therefore, the red and redden the white. End quote. The origin of these four phases can be traced at least as far back as the 1st century. Zosimus of Panapolis wrote that it was known to marry the Jewess. The development of black, white, yellow, and red can also be found in the Psycha Kai Mystica or Pseudo-Democritus, which is often considered to be one of the oldest books on alchemy. After the 15th century, many writers tended to compress Citrinus into Rubedo and considered only 3 stages. Other color stages are sometimes mentioned, most notably the Cauda pavonis, peacock's tail, in which an array of colors appear. The Magnum Opus had a variety of alchemical symbols attached to it. Birds like raven, swan, and phoenix could be used to represent the progression through the colors. Similar color changes could be seen in the laboratory, where, for example, the blackness of rotting, burnt, or fermenting matter would be associated with Negredo. Accomplishing the great work, symbolized as the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, represents the culmination of the spiritual path, the attainment of enlightenment, or the rescue of the human soul from unconscious forces which bind it. The great work signifies the spiritual path towards self-transcendence in its entirety. This is the process of bringing unconscious complexes into conscious awareness in order to integrate them back into oneself. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Eliphas Levi, 1810 to 1875, one of the first modern ceremonial magicians and inspiration for the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, discussed the great work at length, giving it a spiritual meaning by analogy of the alchemical Magnum Opus of perfecting lead into gold and mortality into immortality. Quote, "Furthermore, there exists in nature a force which is immeasurably more powerful than steam, and by means of which a single man, who knows how to adapt and direct it, might upset and alter the face of the world. This force was known to the ancients. It consists in a universal agent having equilibrium for its supreme law, while its direction is concerned immediately with the great arcanum of transcendental magic. This agent is precisely that which the adepts of the Middle Ages denominated the first matter of the great work. The Gnostics represented it as the fiery body of the Holy Spirit. It was the object of adoration in the secret rites of the Sabbath and the temple, under the hieroglyphic figure of Baphomet, or Adrogne of Mendes. He further defined it as such, quote, "The great work is, before all things, the creation of man by himself, that is to say, the full and entire conquest of his faculties and his future. It is especially the perfected emancipation of his will." Within Thelema, the great work is generally defined as those spiritual practices leading to the mystical union of the self and the all through the accomplishment of true will. Its founder, author, and occultist Aleister Crowley reiterated the idea of the unification of opposites, saying in his book Magic Without Tears, quote, "The great work is the uniting of opposites. It may mean the uniting of the soul with God, of the microcosm with the macrocosm, of the female with the male, of the ego with the non-ego." End quote. Although the great work can describe specifically the moment of union between the self and the divine, it can also deal with the spiritual process in its entirety. Crowley also speaks on the great work as the conscious process of spiritual growth. The aspect of conscious devotion to the great work is very important. By purposely, consciously turning inward and choosing to pursue self-realization, the seeker seals themselves in their very own vas hermeticum, their very own alchemical vessel. This attitude to deliberate turning within is necessary for the great work. By consciously devoting oneself to the great work, and therefore sealing oneself within one's vas hermeticum, the inner heat of psychic struggle, which is generated from this, aids in the dissolution of ego boundaries and the integration of what is unconscious. Awareness is the greatest alchemy there is. Just go on becoming more and more aware. You will find your life changing for the better in every possible dimension. It will bring great fulfillment. Raineju. Thank you for listening, mortals. Please leave a comment below. I love interacting with you, mortals. Oh, and as I said in the beginning of the video, I've gone through and uploaded all the scripts to my almost 70 videos on Patreon. So if you're interested in reading them, then go become a supporter. I don't enjoy putting things behind paywalls, but since my videos are free, it is out there, and a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. I don't think I'll be using a repeating outro anymore. That is just the point you click off. I want something more organic. Anyways, see you next time, alchemists.